My name is Lark Zunich, and I'm going to be working with you today on classroom management techniques. And some of them are about how you deal with students in your classroom, and some of them are about how to order your classroom and classroom workings. So what I thought we'd start with is actually to do something a little bit interactive. This is not my computer, so bear with me. I'm not sure how to make this move. So we're going to roll up our sleeves a little bit, and we're going to start with, if we had had a larger group, you all had got a chip when you came in. And this is what I would do in my classroom. To split people up who already know each other is I give them colored chips, and then I would say, okay, everybody who has a yellow, get in the same group together. Or if I put all the chips in order, I would say, okay, you have to have somebody who has a different color in your group. So they have to find 4 different colors or 5 different colors of chips. So in that way, your talkative students get separated, and the people who know each other get separated. And sometimes you find a very shy student isn't shy. They just have been dominated by their friend who always talks or always talks over them. So we would do that, but as a group of 4, we're going to be fine, I think, working like this. And so then I want you to meet your new partners. So I want you to introduce yourselves to the people at your table. We're going to kind of work as a group as a whole, or I might have Christina come over here. Yeah. So just introduce yourself to the people and tell them what your department you're in and why you chose to come here today. You have to talk to each other. Oh. So you guys are participating, you're not facilitators?
Next to calculating grades, it's probably the trickiest thing for me is keeping order in the classroom. It's something that I do in class a lot. How about you?
Yeah, me too.
What about you?
Yeah, just part-time works for them.
Yeah, I find one thing class is we have kind of a laid-back atmosphere for some of our it's kind of messy.
In your duads or partnerships, duos, what I'd like you to do is collaborate on the behavioral and teaching challenges that you feel like you have in your classroom. So what do you feel like you're facing? And that's what the paper for is in the center. You can write large or small, but just what do you feel like are the things you're facing right now or dealing with, or issues that come up in the classroom. So there's different colored pens. You can write in any direction on the paper. Yes. That one doesn't work? There you go. Here's a new tag. You can join a table and.
Our challenges,
maybe getting attention from after group work. Yeah, that's a good one. Hi. Benefiting from that, and the other half of them are just goofing off and talking about the weekend. And
so staying focused on the task.
During group work. Yep.
Okay, and after you've put some ideas on your paper, if you're doing it independently, discuss them with your partners. See if they're having similar situations, difficulties, problems.
Oh, okay.
Everything.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, well, another cell phone, or iPod.
It's the iPod.
And now it's the iPad.
As I try to get the students to sort of get the idea that we're emulating a work environment where you're expected to be on time, you're expected to have your work done, and you wouldn't tell your boss, oh, I couldn't get it because, you know, my computer didn't work, and, you know, like not having an essay to turn in because my computer didn't work. So something like accountability, fewer excuses, or not, way to phrase that. Which department are you in, Donald? Okay.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Are you full-time faculty?
No.
Allison, part-time.
Okay, so you're talking kind of about group work?
Well, we're talking about challenges, I think, as we're making a list. But if you have something to add to group work, not a solution, but a challenge you face, because I think she's going to talk about.
Okay, well, you've had a chance to write some things down and talk amongst yourselves. So I'm going to ask for your attention back in 3, in 2, in 1, all eyes. Thank you. Okay. These are the techniques that I use in the classroom, so you'll see them throughout. But when you have a lot of people talking in group work, one of the things you have to do is get them back to you. And so that's one of the things that I do in my classroom is I tell them they have to finish up what they're speaking about, give them a time frame, usually 1 more minute, 2 more minutes, and then I do count them down, 3, 2, 1, all eyes on me. And some of my students have said, oh, we did that in junior high, and I said, because it worked, right?
Does it really work?
It does. Okay, so they know if I say you have 1 more minute, 2 more minutes, finish your conversation, say your last piece, 3, 2, 1, and then the conversations end, and they're ready for sharing of group work. So we're going to share out just one thing on your paper, and we'll kind of go around a couple times because I think we'll have some redundancies of things you're concerned about. So what's one item that is a behavioral or teaching challenge for y'all?
Keeping students engaged.
Keeping students engaged.
We were talking about what you just said, is how to get their attention after they've been in a group.
Okay.
And how to keep them focused on the work they're doing in group rather than just talking about the weekend.
All right.
We talked a lot about electronics.
Okay.
And there's basically the attention aspect.
That electronics take away in the classroom.
Yes.
And I know for some classes you're not able to say just no electronics.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason they have to have a calculator, they have to have something in class.
Which happens to be part of the cell phone.
Right.
I have to get this text done because I can't look over their shoulder, but
Yes.
you know, I mean, it's literally now the iPad. Now it's just a little bit bigger cell phone.
Yeah.
Which is
Yes.
great. I mean,
It-
for them, I mean, for notes and stuff, because they don't have to buy the paper as much.
It can be difficult. I've had students ask me, can I keep my notes on my laptop? And I simply say no. Because too many studies have been done that college students are not taking notes on their laptops. They're simply surfing the net and doing other things. And so with that as my evidence, I'm able to say to them, there are too many students who don't use their electronics appropriately, so we don't have any in class. But I have that ability because we don't need calculators. I ask them to make a to-do list. That's part of our study skills unit. And a lot of them like to make their to-do list on their cell phone, and so I check their to-do lists in the first couple weeks, but I check it first thing, and then I say all cell phones off, right? We've already done that part, now cell phones are off. So if you can compartmentalize, if they have to use electronics, if you can compartmentalize when they get to use their electronics, then it's they're all away or they're on. And that kind of separates it a little bit. That helps out too. What's another one you had on there?
Organizing the changes between activities.
Okay, that the transition times can be really awkward sometimes. What's another one you have on your list?
Oh, too many excuses.
Yes, and we are going to get to that actually. The excuses that come with why they don't have anything done or what they're supposed to have done or the computer broke or the printer is not printing and all those things. What else do we have?
We talked about the cost of classes, cost of books, cost of materials.
Which means they're not bringing books and materials and things because the cost is very high. Okay, so we have a lot of different challenges. Let's do one more round and then we'll see if there's anything else that's burning on your mind.
I just said finding new ways to present information.
Okay, what's another one over here that might be a burning issue?
I think we exhausted all
Okay.
of ours.
All right, and you have several over here.
Well, dropout, absentees. I think that's.
So that's part of keeping them engaged, that they'll want to come back, or?
Well, you know, the cost of the class is what, $90.
Mm-hmm.
And so book is just as expensive as the class, and so it's $100 out of the pocket. I don't need to. That's okay. I'll take it next semester.
Okay.
And so I'll take it next semester. I'll take it next semester. We got people in there taking math, 5 and 815. They've been there for, they got a PhD in math 805. They've taken it so many times.
Okay.
It's just, they're just looking for the right professor. It doesn't conflict with American Idol or, fill in the blank.
Yes. Okay, you had another one or a couple that you want to?
Honestly, the difference between high academic standards and edutainment, and that contrast that we have as instructors.
Okay.
And there's times where I am more entertaining than others, rather than let's go, let's go, let's go.
To
And
get it
student
done.
motivation, apathy.
Okay, so we're going to dive into some of these and see if we can't address some of these issues, especially the one you just mentioned. We just did that. Okay, types of behavioral challenges. I want to start with the immature student, which is part of what you were just talking about. And I find that these are leftover high school behaviors. And we have some of these things that go on. There's an us versus them type of thinking, and it's us students versus them teachers. And that's really old, and it's very high school, and it can usually be corrected by the older students in your class who will self-correct the students and say, what are you doing, or why are you giving the teacher attitude? And I often don't have to do much about that, except for occasionally I do have to take students aside to speak to them about what's appropriate in class. And so I actually came up with an assignment that helps with that a little bit. And this comes from their schedule of classes. They can get it off the internet. It's also inside the, there you go, the catalog, the course catalog. So this is from a spring. And one of their first assignments is to read this and annotate it. And the students don't often realize that when they agree to be a student, they've agreed to all the rules and regulations on this page. So this comes right from their scheduled classes, but also to be a student. And so that we start with the vision, and then in the classroom, and my favorite one talks about creating the proper environment. So respect for the instructor. This means arriving on time, not leaving early, bringing appropriate materials, not speaking with other students while a lecture is in progress, not bringing food or drink to the classroom, not being loud, boisterous, or argumentative. And they have turned that in terms of respect to the instructor. That if you come late or you leave early or you're trying to eat in class or all of those things, you're actually being disrespectful to your instructor. And that's very eye-opening to students, yes.
It's kind of the implication that it's a contract, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, there's some discussion in the literature that students have a right to challenge the contract. In a sense, it's not so much here, but depending on how the professor applies the rules.
So,
And therefore, depending on the more kind of knowledgeable students, they will continue to push their boundaries.
but this is not mine. This is college-wide, right? This belongs to the college. And if students are concerned about one of the statements that are made here, they have a proper due process. And part of their due process is to talk to their ASB, right? Because the ASB, I understand, was a part of defining what all of these words mean. So if you have a very savvy political science student who wants to challenge it, I would just push them into the right course to challenge it. You don't challenge it in class. You challenge it through proper procedures. It's the same thing as if I don't like something that's happening, the police officer wants to give me a ticket, I don't say to him, you can't give me this ticket, right? I still have to sign the ticket to say I received it. I can then go to court to argue it. But it's not that I can't just say, I'm not doing this because I didn't do that. I don't have that right. They have respect to other students. And it talks about not interfering with the other's right to listen, participate. And it does talk about inappropriate language. Again, if we have an immature student, we want to talk about how many different religious persuasions we have on campus and different people's beliefs and how using your language is important in class. You don't want to insult anyone's belief system, or you don't want to insult them as people so they feel uncomfortable in class. Some of my more immature students suddenly their eyes start to get bigger. They think about the way they talk and speak, that we're not all part of a rap video. We need to think about that. Campus life is not like television. And they, ooh, this is different. So when you're going through some of this with them, I think they get a greater impact of how different college will be from high school. And part of that is the responsibility is on the student. The responsibility is so much more on the student for their behavior and their actions. And they get over to disciplinary actions, and it talks about they don't have to be done in order, depends on the severity, warning, reprimand, probation, social suspension, disciplinary suspension, and expulsion. And they had no idea that they could be removed from the college. It talks in here about how an instructor can remove a student from the classroom if they're being disruptive. The students are like, really? You can just tell us to leave? Yes, you can be told to leave. They do like their due process. They look at their conduct of student, standards of student conduct. So this is a really valuable tool to help with a lot of these immature leftover behaviors, to address them as you're the adult, you've come to school here, this is what you've agreed to. These are the college rules, not my classroom rules, but the college rules. And so we have a discussion about it. What did they know? What didn't they know? Now, part of that discussion is, remember the assignment was to read and annotate it before they came to class. So if they come to class and it's blank, they don't have a lot to say in the discussion, but they listen to the people who did the assignment, and it begins to click that if you don't do the assignment, you don't have anything to say, right? Because if I walk around and they have nothing on their paper and they want to give an opinion, I'll say, did you prepare ahead? Right? Are you ready for this discussion? So it's important that they get the idea they have to be prepared in order to participate in a discussion. There have been times when I've said to students, if it's a really important discussion we're going to have, I'll walk around and look at their books or whatever. And the books that are not completed, I'll say, you need to go outside or to the library until you've completed this assignment, then you can come back in and participate in the discussion. I think a lot of people do that to make sure that students are aware that they can't just fake it all the time.
I sometimes use that technique, but I also give them an absence, because otherwise I think that a lot of students will say, this is great, she's going to tell me to leave if I'm not prepared, but unless there's a bigger consequence.
Right.
So do you do the same type of thing? Do they receive an absence for that?
I always have a writing assignment that goes with a discussion, and they get a 0 on the assignment,
Okay.
and they can't make it up. So for them, it's a huge deficit. It's in their reflection. It's like 15% of their grade. They know it's a big deal. It's part of that 15%. They know it's a big deal if they screw up on one of those writing assignments. So for them, it's like, if I don't have this done, she's not going to let me stay for the discussion. I don't get to do the writing assignment. So there is a consequence, whether it's an absence or something else that happens. The talk, text, comment. Some students feel that they must talk in class or they must text in class. They have that new research that just came out 2 weeks ago that texting is actually connected to the same endorphins in our brain, our pleasure center in the brain, and that it's a type of addiction. And that students who are texting constantly are getting dopamine, more and more dopamine to their system, and so when they can't text, they get shaky, they feel like they're missing out on something, they get depressed. And so in some ways, trying to stop someone from texting is almost an intervention, right? You can't text in class can really be hard on students who've been sending, I think they said teenagers send up to 3,000 texts a month. So if someone's texting that much, to suddenly say for the next hour and a half you have to be out of contact with your posses, could really create disequilibrium in someone because they're not ready for that. But that's a high school behavior. And that's something that we have to talk about as adults. We choose when to do something and when not to do something. If you were an alcoholic, I wouldn't let you drink the whole time in class. So texting for me is almost the same thing. It's an addiction that you're letting yourself do all the time. And occasionally there's the I don't want to be here. I just had this week. I don't care, I don't want to be here. There's the door, right? And I think students are not aware of that. But I've also talked to students who've said that I'm not a good teacher or something. I remind them that I'm not the only teacher who teaches this subject and we're having a mismatch and perhaps they should take someone else. And they are always so surprised that rather than getting insulted or whatever, I just admit, we don't get along. Go ahead, take a different teacher. Here's the other teachers who teach at this time. Go somewhere else. That as adults, we're going to have to interact with each other more maturely. This is not, you were assigned to my class, you must stay here. And then would say, oh, I can't, I work, and this is the only time I can take your class. I said, well, then I guess you're going to have to buck up and figure out how to take this class. You know, and it's that whole maturity thing coming back into play with whatever you do. So, yeah.
I love this immaturity thing and talking and texting. What I try to do at the beginning of the semester is I try to learn the student's first name. So as opposed to them blending in with the wallpaper and Mark, or Thackeray, or Joel. That gets their attention, and throughout the semester, I mean, at the end of the semester, I try to, get their last name too, but I don't call them by the last name. But I try to know the students, and if they know that I know their name, I think that that just raises the attention level just a little bit, because I know that person, and they obviously know me.
So sometimes they don't know your names, which is even funnier.
Oh, yeah, that is.
I have a really hard time with names, so I actually bring in my digital camera, and I have the students make a little placard with their first name, last initial, and I take a picture of everyone. I don't send it out, I don't send it over the internet, and I don't send it anywhere to print it. I print them at home, but then I put it on their information card, and that's how I take roll, is their name with their picture, and I look at them. So I am calling them by name, but it's also really helpful for me when there's this empty seat. I can't quite remember who sits in that empty seat. I kind of go through my cards. I'm like, oh, that's Jeanette. Jeanette's not here today. So I have a better idea of who's in class. And I do find that the more you use their names, the more likely they are to pay attention in class and to be aware and all of those good things.
Do you use index cards when you say cards?
Yeah, I have a 4x6 card that they fill out on the first day that has their name and the schedule they're keeping and where they work, and we put a motivational quote on it that they want to do for the goal, and then their picture goes on that. So I collect that as my information card. Types of behavioral challenges. This is one of the biggest we have, is that we have this mismatch going on. And it's between social contexts from behavior, expectations, and different, not just social contexts, but levels of society, I'm not sure I'm saying this correctly, socioeconomic levels, and also social levels is the best way I can say it.
Cultural?
Cultural, maybe. And Ruby Payne did a framework for understanding poverty. I know some people like her work, some people don't like her work. What I like about her work was the explanation that if someone has grown up she calls it 2 levels different from where you are, that they don't have any of the same, what we call common sense that you do. And really, there is no such thing as common sense. It's really common shared values of a cultural group, of a socioeconomic group, of a standing between people. So sometimes people are like, I can't believe a student would say that, right? You would never tell your boss this, or you would never, they don't know any better half the time. And that's one of the difficulties we have, is that our expectations of what will happen in class and their expectations of what will happen in class are completely different, are so off. And I think that her work really addresses that and talks about it and puts it into better perspective. In that, for me, it was a huge awakening. I had a student who kept coming to class and loudly complaining, I can't believe she does this. She makes us learn so much. We have too much to read. And like really loudly complaining about me in front of me, but not to me. And so we had a huge difficulty, and that's when I discovered Ms. Payne's work, in that in her cultural setting, that is how you explain to someone the problem you're having with them so they can change. Okay? That's how you bring up a difficulty so the other person will know what they're doing wrong so they can change. For me, that was just rude, right? Why wouldn't you say to the teacher the problem that you're having? Why wouldn't you confront it face to face? Why wouldn't you do something about it together? So my expectation is that you would seek out the instructor to talk with them about difficulties you're having. This student's expectation was, if she just kept complaining loudly enough in front of me, I would realize my error and I would correct it for the class. I would assign less homework, I would be less demanding. Very difficult mismatch that we have. We also have a mismatch between the last context setting that a lot of the students had and the setting that we have in school. In that for a lot of them, if you showed up, if you turned in work regardless of value or quality, and you stayed to the end, you passed. Period. That's true. You know, you could get all Fs in 6th grade, you go to 7th grade. You can get all Fs in 9th grade and you go to 10th grade. So there's not a sense of urgency on the learner's part, and there's not a sense of true consequence. So when you get paper after paper after paper that has a 56% or a 32% or a 12%, there's no sense that, you know, if I don't, you know, get these grades up, I'm not going to pass. Because the students are saying, I'm here every time, I'm doing the work you're assigning, I'm taking the tests, therefore I pass. And that is the expectation. So we have to really work at explaining what we expect is different maybe from what they've had before, and that it has to be really, really clear. That it's not like on television. Every television show about college is about social life. It's about fun. I don't know any show that shows them actually studying, right? So we have this information all around us that says you need to study 2 to 3 hours for every hour you spend in class. For a 3-unit class, that's about 6 hours of studying per week per class. That is the norm, the expectation. I talk with my students about that. We do an assignment on it, and they still say, for this class, I have to study up to 2 hours a week. I'm like, this is a 3-unit class. I'm going to give you 6 hours of homework. But they're telling back to me, I'm going to study 2 hours a week for your class. So regardless of how much homework you give me, I'm going to give this class 2 hours of attention. It's all the time I've scheduled for it. It's all the time I have. I work. I have a family. You know, I have a boyfriend. Whatever else, you get 2 hours of my time beyond this class time. It's, you know, and when I talk to my students privately or we discuss how much time they're spending, it all comes down to their expectations, what they thought college would be like. And I've had several students break down crying and saying, this is not fun, right? What happened to the fun college life that I have seen on TV and I've been working toward through high school? This is not fun. And I think, I don't know, you know, how we got to that point, the edutainment, that it should be fun. That class should be fun, that we should laugh the whole time, that nothing should be difficult or hard. I even had a student say to me once, you know, school should be easy. The rest of our lives are so hard, right? We're struggling to work, we're struggling to make our family life. Everything else is so hard. School should be the place where it's easy. And I thought, no, this doesn't work that way. So it can be very difficult to do that. And then we have this continuum of unrealistic expectations. I don't know how else to put it, so I'm going to show the next slide that kind of gets to it. But this is where a lot of our problems happen.
And I have a question before you move on
Okay.
to this one. For the framework for understanding poverty and the example that you gave about the student who was talking about you rather than to you, what is the solution based on Ruby Payne's writing? Are we supposed to educate, is it our role to educate that person to talk to us, or is our role to adapt in some way and change our behavior?
We have a little bit of both. For me, that work was very helpful for me to understand what's going on so that I wasn't always furious and angry and upset with my students. But Sabrina Sanders, who's our Dean of Students right now, is that what we call her?
I don't know, Dean of something.
Yes, Student Affairs. She's very, very helpful right now. That would be the person that you would contact, because it is not your job to re-educate what's appropriate in social context. You can do it generally speaking. For instance, you don't behave the same way at your grandma's house as you do at a party. You behave differently at a funeral than you do at a social gathering to celebrate a wedding, right? We know about acting differently in different social contexts. And students do know about that. So sometimes I approach it from that direction. This is just one more social place you go that has a different set of rules and regulations and expectations. But if they're, this student in particular, deeply set in, this is the way life's supposed to happen, and you're not behaving correctly because she complained loudly every class and I wasn't doing anything differently, then I send her to Sabrina Sanders, or whoever it was. I think it was Byron at that time, but Sabrina Sanders is our current person, to say, Dean of Student Affairs, and it's their job to re-educate the students into what's appropriate for college life. Yes?
Are you saying that you have to refer students to the Office of Student Affairs? Well, it is.
If you're having a huge mismatch with a person who's disruptive in class and who is not capable in a single conversation to understand that their behavior is not appropriate for the classroom setting or this classroom setting, then I would say don't continually beat your head against that wall. Send them to someone who's better at it, but also who's more trained. I only know a few social contexts. Sabrina knows all kinds of them, right? She's dealt with all sorts of students. But every time I come up with something that's completely out of my depth, I think to myself, I can't even believe I heard that come out of their mouth. And then I click and go, they're from a very different social expectation than I am. I need to back off. And rather than say, I can't believe you said that, in my head even, you know, I have to back off and think, where does this come from? Can I do a quick correction? And if I can't, you know, I am not ashamed at all to move it on. But I almost always have to go back to expectations, expectations, expectations. What do you expect? The continuum, are we ready for the continuum? Okay, so a continuum, as you know, starts from one end and goes to the other. And so mine starts from the A++ people who think they're getting fantastic grades all the way to I have my Easter Island people who I think are sort of odd and crazy. And so people fall anywhere in between there. Okay? And you have the students who are going to give you trouble in class because they don't accurately perceive their own performance. And I think this is some of the things that you were talking about with having high standards versus edutainment. Students don't accurately perceive how they're doing in class. They all think they're passing because, as I said before, their last context was, if I just do this, I can pass. And I've had students tell me in high school, if we didn't cause trouble in class, and we turned in all our work, regardless of the grade we got on it, and we took every test, we got a C. Period. And I'd say, when you got the grades back, were they all C's on? Oh no, and they'd show me 36%, 42%, 58%. They'd show me papers. And I'd think, how does this come out to be a C? Because in my class, anything in our reading department, you have to have a 75 or higher to pass the course. And so if it's below 75, I have to write every single time on anything that's below 75%, no pass, for the students to understand you haven't hit the standard, right? You have to be this tall to ride through the ride. And if you don't get to the line, you don't go on. And that's a very different concept from what they've had previously. So they might not accurately perceive their own performance. I have a student right now who's at like a 62%, and he keeps saying to me, now when I take this test, I'll be up to 75, right? No, it's not accumulation of points. We're talking about a percentage. It's how you're performing on your tests. You know, if you get 100%, I'll average that into the rest, and we'll see how you're performing. Not getting that. They don't understand the math, right? If you're trying to show them calculations or the math or how the points add up, they really don't understand the math. And I'm working in underprepared students in reading, and what I find is a lot of my students are also in very low math classes, and they might be in English 801A or B. So I have students who may not have good writing skills, may not have good math skills, and I'm asking them to understand a percentage. You know, and I write out, you got this many points over this many possible. I show them how to convert it into a percentage, and then we look at, you need 75% to pass. So I'm teaching mini math lessons in my class every time I pass out their grades. They always want to know who had the highest grade. I cannot tell you who had the highest grade, but I can tell you what the highest grade was. So I also put on the range. We had from a 92% to a 23% on the same test. That's the range of grades. Because the students who are getting the lowest grades are always saying, it's impossible. Nobody gets a good grade in this class, right? Everybody's failing. And you have to kind of counteract that too with, no, we have people who are getting A's on everything. We have students who are passing. Things are everything in between. And then they're having trouble with medication would be my people on the far side of my continuum. You're going to have students in your class who are schizophrenic or do have medication needs, and you've had them, and they can cause behavioral or expectation problems within the whole class. People who talk nonstop, and when you're trying to get closer to them, you realize they're also sweating and talking nonstop. So you might have issues with some sort of drug usage. All of that comes into our classroom. We have homeless people who are in our classroom because the school's a dry and warm place to be, especially in the winter. So we're dealing with people who may or may not have their books or anything else that they need, but they need to be in a classroom. So, and on this unrealistic expectations, one of the things that really helps is to have everything in writing. So here's some expectations that I do for class. You probably do something very similar. I'm not trying to put anything new on you, just different things you can look at. One are the expectations for my class and what I expect as classroom behavior in our community of learners. And if you flip it over to the back, this I took off a website which I gave you. It says what a responsible and successful student needs to know. This is really basic stuff. How do you be successful in the classroom? How to study, where to go to get help, asking questions. Some of my students still don't get the idea that when you get into class and you sit down, you should take out your book. You should open up to a blank piece of paper. You should have your pen out. That these are expectations for a college student, that when the class begins, you're ready. I find, and you may not, again, I'm working with a lot of underprepared students, I find that a lot of the time I'm saying to my students, write this down. Right? Very pointedly, write this down. And then there's a flurry. Backpacks and things unzipping and notebooks are coming down. And it's like, okay, why in the middle of class are you just now getting your notebook out? When the PowerPoint's been going for 10 minutes and I've been lecturing the whole time, it's not until I say, write this down, that the pins come out. So at the beginning now of class, right, we today are going to need your book, your course packet, your notebook for notes, and at times I feel like I'm back, when I taught middle school, I'm back at that place again. But I would rather do that at the beginning and set the tone than have that flurry of activity, because when I don't say it, that's what happens. In the middle of class, it's this cacophony of sound of, do you have a pencil? I don't have an eraser. Everything that goes on from people who just aren't prepared to take notes in class. But also setting of expectations comes this one, which I developed over time, has to do with communicating. I found that students didn't know how to send an email. And I would get an email from cutie-pie16 at Hotmail. What was the assignment? And I had to write back, Dear cutie-pie16, I don't know who you are. I don't know what class you're in. I don't know what assignment you're talking about. Please send more information. And I thought, I cannot do this anymore, And they're not embarrassed at all that I have to write to cutie-pie16. So I wrote them scripts. This is what an email is supposed to look like, right? This is what a telephone conversation should look like. And they all the time say, Ms. Zunich, I wasn't in class, and I need to know if we're having a test. Bye. And I'll say, you didn't call me back. You didn't leave me a telephone number. Well, just look on your phone. It's not a cell phone, right? Our telephones here don't capture your number. So that's why we have a script. And so some kids get really, really nervous when they're going to call you, too. And you hear that, right? Hi, Ms. Zunich, click. And I'll get like 4 clicks in a row before I get a message. So I thought if they had a little script they could write out, they could practice. And my emails look like this now for my students. Name, ID number, what they expect from me. Sometimes it looks like they copied it exactly. I don't care, right? As long as I can read it, I know who they are, I know what to expect. That can be really helpful. So on that continuum, I'm trying to help the continuum go more towards they know what to expect in class, I know what to expect of them. We can go back and forth with that. And I'm hoping that that continuum of what's acceptable and what they expect, that we're meeting more, right? We're meeting more in the middle, and we're not having these wide variances of, I can't believe that happened, to do that. Another part of thing is what to do. So setting the environment from the first class, I'm sure a lot of you do that. Millions of years ago when I started teaching, it was not that long ago, maybe 15 years ago, someone said to me, whatever you're going to do for the rest of the semester, do the first class. If you want them to work in groups, have them work in groups the first class. If you expect them to write, have them write. If you expect them to read something, read. Whatever it is you're going to do for the rest of the semester in class, have it be done in your first class. That was a great piece of advice. So my first class, we spent about the first 45 minutes doing all these activities and group work and discussion and thinking and talking, and we don't take roll for a really long time that first day. That also helps all the late registrants get in and everything else. But it's really helpful for the students to see that this class is about working the whole time, and that there's very little sitting, and it's very participatory, and off we go.
Lark, I've also heard don't smile until after the midterm.
I would say if you have a really difficult class, I do a lot of smiling. I joke around. I have a nice time with my students, unless I get a heckler. And the minute I get a heckler, I don't heckle back, but if I get a heckler, I turn my back to them and ignore them, and I teach to the rest of the class. And the fellow students are very good, and the body language is really fast to tell the heckler they're in the wrong place, right? And I immediately speak to that person after class about, clearly our styles don't match, you need to take a different teacher, here's the other times the classes are offered, I would like to see you drop this course. And they learn right away. If I don't want to, if I want to be in this class, I have to behave in a way that's going to suit.
So do they usually drop, or they usually say, oh, I'm not going to drop, and then change?
Well, what I find is when these community expectations come out, and we go over what I expect in a community, that really changes the atmosphere. And then we do a whole thing about what makes a successful student that first day, and they make a list, like we're doing in small groups, and then we share it as a large group. They know how to be successful students. And I make them write on their information card one goal they have for the year. We flip it over and who's the teacher from whom you learn the most? Not your favorite teacher, but the person you learn the most from. We make a long list. And then I have a really good, clear idea of what they expect from a teacher. And I go through it. Tells us how we're doing. Keeps us on our, and I just go, that's a high school thing. That's a high school thing, right? I cross them right off the list to let them know in college, it's not going to happen with your teacher. I'm not going to come to you and say, you're missing an assignment. You're missing 2 assignments, right? That's their job. So that helps them know expectations again. A lot of expectation setting. I was going to say, clearly state your expectations in writing. That has to do with your syllabus and all that good stuff, which I'm sure all of us do, is that we do it in writing. But we're back to those mismatch of cultural settings. The more you can put in writing, either through your syllabus or through, like I have this course packet where I do things like this, the better it is for the student. You could say it 1,000 times. They will not hear it because it doesn't have any meaning to them. But if it's written down, and you can go back to it later and point to it when they are ready to hear it. And so I've even had students say, has this been in my packet the whole time? Yes, this has been in your packet the whole time. And they're so surprised, I don't remember that. I had trouble with a boy and a girl flirting. Got to the point where after spring break, they hadn't seen each other all week. And so they were so busy flirting, they couldn't pay attention to class. And as I was lecturing, they had to talk louder and flirt more loudly over my lecture because I was really messing up their social life. And I took them outside and I highlighted this part about not talking while the teacher's talking. And I said to them, I have never had students in class who lack the maturity to self-correct their own behavior. You may no longer sit together. That was it. And that was it.
Did you say it just like that?
Just like that.
And what did they say?
Well, first I had to think what that meant. I've never had a student in class who was too immature or so immature they couldn't self-correct their own behavior. They were like, self-correct, my own behavior, immaturity. Nobody wants to be called immature. So I said, you can't sit together anymore.
That they understood.
They understood that. One of them understood I was calling them immature. The other one didn't. But they don't sit together anymore. They don't flirt, except for before and after class. And I don't have the problem of someone talking the entire time I'm trying to give class, which is pretty important to me. Everyone's different, but you want to have a lesson plan that moves. This is that high academic standards. It does address a little bit of edutainment. And I put down some things that might help you if you are not a trained teacher. A lot of people come here with great expertise in their field, but they weren't a trained teacher. I would recommend then the essential elements of effective instruction. That is from Madeline Hunter. These are how to set up a lesson plan. So Madeline Hunter has a good one. Who are my other people? Hers is the best, in my opinion. But you could go with Steve Binko has a lesson plan model, and Christy Keller has a lesson plan model. And these models move you through anticipatory set, saying your objective or goal for the students so they understand what you're doing that day, doing input, modeling, guided practice, checking for understanding, doing some independent practice before you let them go for the day. So they kind of move in such a way. Madeline Hunter's has this closure thing where they have to do a little bit of reflecting on what they learned before they leave and walk out the door, so they kind of know what they're doing for homework. And that moves, just keeps the class moving, right? It moves it right along. So a really good lesson plan can help you. And I find that Bloom's taxonomy is taxing to use, but I did find Costa's levels of inquiry, which I think are much more helpful when you're doing lesson planning, as a way to scaffold your questions. So level 1 questions are very explicit, and then 2 are implicit, and then 3 are experience-based. And it's so much easier to make sure that you're always doing some critical thinking in class. You're not always just getting some knowledge, some of that basic 1 or 2 levels from Bloom's taxonomy. Or that when you're creating questions for your test that you think, oh, this is an easy question, right? I'm just asking them to describe something. But when you look at the question in depth, you realize you're actually asking them to synthesize and then describe, and that's the highest level. So I think by using this a little bit, we have a better idea of if we're asking the kind of questions that get to the sort of knowledge that we want, or if we're asking too much brain work and we think it's an easy question. So for me, I always have to kind of restart and say, did I start at level 1? You know, do I have some questions that build on them so that the students can keep going? And then I use an agenda and outline on the board, something they can see. For me, it reminds me what I'm doing that day, but it helps the students, especially the clock watchers, know where they are, right? How much longer? And if you can, move the chair so that they can't see the clock. So they're looking at you, not the clock, and you have an ability to work with them, to motivate them and do that. Okay, and then your first line of defense in your classroom, whether you know this or not, is actually your personal cell phone. We don't have in our classroom any kind of communication system if you're having a problem. Please have into your cell phone pre-programmed the campus police. And if you have a rough problem, that's who you call. I mean, if you need a student removed immediately who's being belligerent, this may not be an issue for some people, but I'm not very tall. And it is very much an issue for me if I get 2 large men who are about to fight or something. I need to be able to whip out my cell phone and hit that thing. And I say to them, campus police are on their way. That's been really helpful. And I've only had to call the police once, but I've threatened about 3 times. So it can be helpful that way too. And then where do you go for help? Your syllabus is your best defense. If it's written in your syllabus, then you know that you can enforce it. Documentation is really an important key for a difficult student. And documentation can happen best if it's something easy for you to do. A lot of people do it on their roll sheet. On the back of their roll sheet, they'll write the date and then what happened. Spoke to Justin about talking too much, right? That's documentation. And you need to document almost anything that happens. Go to your peers. So many people have more experience teaching, or they've dealt with more things, or they have more obvious answers. Then your department head. I CC my department head whenever I have a confrontation, even if I don't think it's a big deal. You know, a student came in and I couldn't get them in. They weren't on the wait list, but they insisted on petitioning, and they argued with me, and I had to make them leave. If I have that name, student name, and ID number, I make sure my department head knows this might be a problem, right? This student was really belligerent. Sabrina Sanders, as I said, is our Dean of Student Affairs currently, and she's the person, yes.
Well, I just wanted to expand on your point about the department head, and now you've also put Sabrina Sanders. She's the dean, right?
Yes.
Student Affairs. We had a few deans over the last couple of years, right? What was his last?
Byron.
Yep, Byron. And then
Byron
did he
Chris
come right
Villa.
after John Philpott? Did he come right after Philpott?
No, then was
Is that
it Chris
correct?
Villa?
Chris,
Oh, yeah,
Robert
yeah.
Garcia.
Oh, we
Yeah.
got a lot of them.
The reason why I mentioned that is
Uh-huh.
because I actually stopped contacting the office because, to be honest, I was unsatisfied with a lot of the responses, and I've had to kind of pretty much develop my own approaches. In some sense, have become more firm on some things, and some other things have become more lax, which to an acceptable level. And so I'm just wondering how you feel about that, because you get into administration, and sometimes some issues are so tough that they don't back the professors all the time.
Well, I always put my department head so that they know what's happening. I think that, and I have a very supportive department head, so maybe it depends on your department head too. Sabrina Sanders has been really good. I had a cheating incident, and I just wrote to her. These two students were cheating, this is what I did, I took the test, blah, blah, blah. And she wrote me back, thank you for keeping me informed, we'll start a file, but she didn't call them in. She's like, you're the teacher, you handled it, which I really appreciated. Another time I had a student who went off because he couldn't get in my class, a late start class. Turns out he wasn't on the wait list, he wasn't enrolled, he was petitioning. I had 35 people in the class and I had 10 people on the wait list. I didn't have any room, but he wanted in that class and I needed to help him out. And you know, and he was really angry. And that went all the way up to dumpers. And it went up fast, you know. And I had documented it. I'd let my head of my department know. I let the division head had gotten a CC from my department head. So I was covered because I quickly documented what had happened the same day it happened. But I don't like it when someone comes to me later and says, you know, we have a student now who's complaining that you're a racist. So you need to respond. I'm thinking, you know, did I keep notes? Do I know what's happening? I had a student who took my class for the 3rd time and failed for the 3rd time. And one of her complaints of calling me a racist was, everybody knows that if you take the same teacher the 2nd time, you automatically pass. And I failed her. And we were like, show us where it says the 2nd time through a class you automatically pass. Well, that's a college legend thing. You know, if you take the same teacher twice, they'll pass you the 2nd time.
It's amazing.
You know, and who knows where that came from. But I find Sabrina Sanders to be very responsive. She gets right back to my emails. She's been very helpful with a couple of students. The counseling center here on campus handles people who have problems, students who come to your office or come to you and, I can't get my work done because, you know, I have so much trauma in my life. And they want to tell you all about their drama. I'm not there for that. I am their instructor. And I'm really willing to listen to very little, to be honest. I really need them to go to a counselor. You know, I'll help, if they want to help with a class, I'll help them with class. If they need an extension because of a small emergency, but what I find is a lot of our students are actually the responsible one in their family, which means all their other family members keep coming to them to help them. So a lot of times they're out of class because they are the responsible one in their family. I have to take my aunt to the hospital. I have to do, you know, they're always leaving to go do something. And I get that you're the responsible one in your family, but you're not being responsible to yourself. And you're not honoring yourself, and you're not coming to class. And I don't have enough hours in the day to figure that one out. So I just send them to the counseling center because I'm not a counselor. I'm not trained in that. It doesn't help. And then the Women's and Men's Center we have on the PCC campus is really good for issues like I'm getting kicked out of my apartment, right? I don't have enough money for rent. We're short on food this month. They're also really good for things like if you suspect any kind of abuse, verbal or physical, that's where I notify them with the student's name and ask them if they can speak to that student or send the student there. And then DSPNS, for Disabled Student Services, can help with a lot of issues. I have a student who takes way too long to take a test. Pretty good in class, doing really well, but I finally asked him if he would consider if there is another issue going on, like test anxiety, high test anxiety, things like that, because he just cannot finish a test in the right length of time. And so we're working together on that issue. He doesn't seem to have any processing problems or anything else that I would need to send him to DSPS for an evaluation. But you know, I can be flexible with a student who clearly knows the material. And then on a test, I mean, I'll walk by 25, 30 minutes into the test, it's still blank. Like he's still frozen. So make some accommodations, and EOPS can do some work, especially with textbooks. They have a textbook borrowing service. And if you are getting financial aid, they have a textbook borrowing service that they do that students can go in and not rent the textbook, but I think borrow it on an ongoing basis.
What is EO?
Equal Opportunity Programs and Services.
Is
Yes.
that too long beach at CC?
It's on campus, and it's on both campuses. So it's an office here on campus, and it's programs that are hand in hand with people who receive financial aid. So not only are we giving them financial aid, we're also giving them other services to make sure they'll be successful. And one of them is making sure they get their textbooks. They have another program that they can buy their textbooks with loan money, and then when their financial aid comes in, they pay them back. They have some counseling services there to help them out with things like how do I study, bus passes. They get other things free from them. Blue books, no, we don't call them that anymore. Exam books, those green books, their quiz strips, their anything like that, they can get the EOPS.
So if they get financial aid, they know about this, right?
No, they don't know about that. Inform them. I realize that people have to go, so just want to say that's all I have. I hope I addressed some of your issues.
Thank you, Mark.
That was very fast.